Turned up. Welcome to the Fuse Box. I'm Reefa, Head of Events at Wired Sussex. I got a bit overwhelmed. There's so many people here. This is great. And welcome to everybody on the live stream as well. The Fuse Box is a huge space for innovators, artists, and creative tech people to come together and make great things. We've got loads of cool VR and immersive tech stuff here. So if you're interested in looking around, if you've never been here before, if you haven't been here for a while, please see Sol or Chris at the networking part of this event later. So we also offer residencies that people can apply for as well. So that's my bit of sales pitch done. Our host tonight is a writer, musician. Trying to do the bar and everything else. Hang on a minute. Right, singer-songwriter with over 10 albums, 2,000 gigs he's done at least, and plenty of Twitter action as well. I could go on about him a lot, but, you know, we have got other people to hear from. So his fans include people like Caroline Lucas, Frank Turner, Jon Snow, and he's influenced a whole generation of songwriters. Please welcome Chris TT.
That felt like a proper show introduction. Wow. Hi. Welcome to this event. It's called Beyond the Live Stream. What is the future for online gigs? Thank you very much for coming to the Fusebox. This is the first in a series of 4 panel events for the 5G Festival Alternative Stages, which is organised by Wired Sussex with the 5G Festival Brighton Dome. We're here, we're in real life, which is great, so that's nice. I can see faces and stuff, but we are also streaming, so I'll try and take some form of attention to the people that join in the chat, if anyone does, and recognise them as well. Mixed events. I'm Chris Thorpe-Tracy, and I'm joined by this amazing panel of 4 experts who I will introduce to you in a minute. We also have quite a lot of expertise and experience in the audience as well, gathered here, which is pretty magic. So we'll hear from our panel first, but when I throw the part of the event open to the floor for questions, do feel free. There is room for kind of comments, ideas and suggestions and just thoughts as well. This is, we're not really trying to come up with any answers immediately. This is a massive topic and we're peering into a really daunting, exciting, unknown future. So it's more a case of trying to begin to establish what the questions are rather than just come up with answers for them. But first, we'll hear from our panel. If you're watching online, do feel free to stick some questions or comments in the chat. Our colleague Anna, who's not here in the flesh, but she's somewhere, is looking after the chat today. Also, on the fuseboxbrighton.com website, on the page associated for this event, was David Hesmondhalgh's video, which is kind of quite a dry academic introduction to this kind of whole area of immersive technology, AR and VR, and I didn't mean to insult it. I mean, it's really good. It's a good introduction. Just it has a academic flavour, and that's really worth having a look at if this event kind of piques your interest in the whole thing. It's just the start of a big conversation, really, isn't it? Because it's the future, and we don't know what's going to happen. God knows what the live world will look like in 3 years, let alone in a decade. Have to mention the dreaded COVID. Everybody in the live music world was thrown into kind of reacting, and it was a huge amount of crisis management that went on, and a lot of things that were both very exciting and creative, but also very daunting, all happened at once. And it feels like an entire industry has spent the last 18 months firefighting, and of course that means, in a bad way, it's terrifying for people's livelihoods, and a lot of people have had it very difficult. But in a positive way, that is where a huge amount of really fervent creative activity has taken place. It's felt a bit like the Wild West. It's kind of really, and artists and promoters really had to just get on with it and go and try things themselves, faced with their entire livelihoods just torn away. And so in a way, I think that's created a different starting place for this conversation had we been having this conversation in 2018, when all of this technology and this issue was already coming. The fact that we're now sitting on the back of 18 months of catastrophic craziness does put it into a slightly different place. The way that the evening is going to work is I'm going to introduce our panellists one by one. A couple of them are going to come up and deliver chat from here. A couple of them are going to stay seated and chat with me. And after they've all done that, we'll throw it open and you get your say and you get to ask questions. And then after that, there's a kind of, well, basically once we're done, don't feel you have to rush off. There's an opportunity to hang out, sit around, chat, drink a bit more. And also Chris Chowan is here to show you. So we've got a demo available. We've got demos available of what it feels like to experience a virtual gig inside a proper virtual headset. Prototype demos of online virtual gig platform, which they're being developed as part of the 5G Festival, developed by Chris Chowan with Donna from The Dome, who's been helping out with that, and Daniel Nathan and Nats and his team at Platform B. And they've collaborated on, I guess you'd call it a prototype platform. And I have to say, if you haven't had an experience of it, it's really, really worth having a go at the end. So that's a plug for something at the end. Now I'm going to introduce the panel. Nearest to me, we have Donna Close, the festival specialist. Donna was behind the legendary White Nights in Brighton, which maybe some of you are too young to have been around to remember, but they were possibly the best ever things that ever happened in this city. These are absolutely incendiary, all-night crazy experiences of art, street art, out in the city. She's worked on Arts Driver, she's worked on XR Circus and Digital Democracies, and currently Donna is Digital Culture Associate, that's right, digital, at the Brighton Dome and Brighton Festival, and leading on the 5G Festival. I already spoke to Donna earlier this summer for my Slack City social series of events, which Slack City Radio produced. So we've chatted quite recently. What's your favourite gig that you can remember seeing in the last decade or so, Donna?
I was saying when he asked me that question, that's a really awful question, and and I was thinking about it because it feels like it's a long time ago that I went to a gig. I haven't been since before all of this happened, and also 10 years is a long time, so there's like a difficult thing to negotiate there. So I'm going to go for the private sector at Phoenix, Brighton, as part of an art happening there. It was fantastic. It was a memorable, brilliant gig, and also shout out to Toots and the Maytals at Brighton Dome, which was
that's great.
Amazing.
I was at that private sector show. That was brilliant. So it was definitely a feeling of a classic art happening on the floor at the Phoenix, and they were brilliant. And I'm only saying that because one of them's in the audience. So
that's not at all why I
no, because you came up with yours beforehand, so that counts. Phil Jones is CEO of Wired Sussex and founder of Fusebox Innovation Hub in which we all sit. So we're all in Phil's house really right now. Despite being a tech and recruitment guru here in Sussex, Phil also started his career in the music business, doing the dreaded journalism and promotion, putting on shows, and then founded Atomic Media with Bob Geldof. And then I only just found this out. Phil was also on the board at MTV, when MTV was like a thing. That's amazing. Wow. Phil, can you think of your favourite gig that you've seen in the past decade?
Yeah, you want me to say your gig, don't you? With Jim Bob. That's what you're angling for.
I promise
here,
I'm not.
Chris. And it was a great gig. It was a great gig,
thanks.
but I'm actually going to go for TV Smith, the ex-Adverts lead singer, played a solo gig in Worthing in a dingy pub. And it was a great pub gig because my 13-year-old kid got his T-shirt signed by TV Smith and is a fan for life. And my wife ended up performing with the backup band because they needed someone on stage to do backing vocals. So it was a really great, fantastic, small, grungy pub gig, of which I've missed greatly over the last year.
That's an amazing TV. Years and years and years. Oh, I was going to say, back in maybe the late 80s, Tom Robinson did a solo tour with TV Smith and with Andy White, the Irish singer-songwriter. And I got a signed set list from that tour in my Christmas stocking from Father Christmas. Anna Molson is here. Anna's an institution in this town. She's run Melting Vinyl, the leading live music promoters, for over 20 years. One of the biggest promoters and bookers in the southeast of England, has done just immeasurable amounts for the alternative music scene here in Brighton and beyond, taken bands from nowhere and also brought huge stars to the town and to around the southeast. So, yes. Anna's also, and it's lesser known that she's also worked on the other side of the divide and toured around UK and Europe as a tour manager and done her own booking agent stuff for bands as well. So she's worked on both sides of the brutal, combative live music industry. Anna currently teaches event management at BIM, which includes teaching about streaming. Anna, I'd imagine it would be the toughest question for you. What's your favourite show you've seen in the past decade?
Oh, there's been so many. I think the shows that happened at the Dome during lockdown were amazing. They just felt so tangible because we had such a pause, and it's such a big part of my life to be at gigs most evenings, to have such a pause and then go to the Dome and see all these amazing grassroots artists from Brighton, and also get 10 different venues to work together from Brighton and Hove on programming it, who normally don't get to work together because they're so busy, or their lives just don't kind of clash. So I saw a band called Yumi in the Weather, and it was just a great kind of pop explosion. I saw Libra, and they just did this really heartfelt kind of performance with they've got a full band, but the lead singer just kind of did a solo song at the end, and it was just really touching. So that's really where my heartbeat is, with the local scene in Brighton, and it was nice to come full circle because that's where I started at Melting Vinyl. And there's just so many great local bands that are just really good quality products that could go on and tour, not that they want to be called products, but they're so good that it was nice to just, we're all very localised, weren't we, at that point, and get the local bands in and performing at the Dome, just felt so alive.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was good.
Brilliant, thanks, Anna. Our final panellist, I'm not calling him the headline, is Dean Marsh of Creative Law and Business. He's our legal business brain, hugely experienced entertainment and media lawyer, and also a business advisor, works with up-and-coming artists, works with some of the biggest names in music and also in wider entertainment, and has a particular expertise in IP. Same question to you, Dean. What can you think?
Could I go back a bit further, actually?
Yeah.
My favourite gig was in the early 80s, actually, and despite seeing millions of shows since then, it has never been surpassed. It was Nina Simone at Ronnie Scott's. She did a residency, and there was a bit of a problem getting in, and it was a bit like Goodfellas, where someone carried a table through the venue and plonked it down right in front of the stage. and she was just on fire that night. It was incredible. But yeah, unsurpassed, I would say. But many years ago, show my age now.
But that's outstanding. You pulled rank there. Hard to compete with Nina Simone. That's brilliant. So now I'm going to hand over first to Donna. If you don't mind starting us off, telling us, kind of providing a bit of context and talking us through the 5G Festival as a whole. So Donna Close, everybody.
I've got a PowerPoint, sorry. I'm the only one, so once this is over, you won't have to see another PowerPoint this evening. So I'm here to talk, the context I'm going to talk about is the 5G Festival. So that's one of the UK government, DCMS, 5G Create projects. There's about 12 of them, and it was all about looking at where 5G could have like an application in a real life industry. And basically we were, this bid was the one that was focused on the creative industries. It's a technology, it's worth sort of saying it's like a technology-driven project. So it's been really long in development because the technology that facilitates it is being developed iteratively over all this time and throughout COVID. So it was actually conceived before COVID and it's been running all the way through. I just wanted to make that point because it does feel like it's been going on for a very long time. But the ambition of it is it's the world's first 5G-powered immersive festival experience. It's basically got 3 different, what they call use cases. So this is all the terminology that anyone who's like enmeshed in any of these like publicly funded projects, use cases is one of the sort of the terms that's used. And there are 3 of those. So one of them is around use case 1, remote music production, it says there, but really it's about artists collaborating remotely. What's interesting about that, of course, is it utilises streaming technology. So in terms of like what you might imagine what the future of live streaming is, it's probably worth having that in mind. This is about artists collaborating with each other remotely, and therefore the audio and the video being in sync enough to facilitate that to happen. And even though that sounds like, well, surely we can do that already, that's not the case. So 5G is about trying to reduce the latency to the point where that's possible, in really possible, because I think we've seen all of those like Zoom videos of choirs singing, and anyone who's on the inside knows that that's sort of, there's either a click track or it's been sort of edited together afterwards to make it look like everyone's in sync, because that is difficult. Everyone's network speeds at different points. Second use case is virtual festival. So this is the idea of using that streaming technology to make those 2 artists appear together in the same virtual space that you can watch either through VR headset or all on your laptop. So actually it's bringing together those 2 artists who are physically distant and putting them together in the same immersive space. And then the third use case, which is the one that we're leading on, is the hybrid festival. So that's like, how could you incorporate all of this like streaming technology into an experience inside a venue that's really meaningful for that audience in there, and feels special and feels different and feels like it's got all of that energy of a gig where everyone is there, even though half the artists aren't there. And how do you convey that to a remote audience? So that's the third use case. They're the list of partners. You can see 9 partners, partners like Warner, Metropolis Studios, O2 Telefonica, now Virgin Media, Audiotonics, who are audio specialists. They create a lot of those sorts of immersive audio technologies, whether that's for live gigs or not. Matavision, who do 360 immersive streaming and things like that. And Livestream, who are developing a blockchain ticketing system for it. And this is I just wanted to share with you some images from the trial. So we've had 2 trials, in March and in June. And I just wanted to show to you, because one of the real challenges we had at the centre of that hybrid experience was, which I'll talk about actually probably at a later event, but just like, how do you convey that to a live audience? How do you convey that in an interesting way rather than just having like those screens either side? So we're working with brilliant artists, Make Amplify, to create this like projection mapped, immersive, dynamic environment inside the dome. That also turns the dome into almost feeling like it's an immersive space, which I was quite interested in. So that's what we're doing. And the image in the top left-hand corner is a drummer in Metropolis, and he and a singer in Metropolis were collaborating live with 3 musicians that we had inside the dome across 2 different areas. and they put on a gig. So that was good, that worked. And I've just got a little video which shows you that better than me talking, but I'm just going to let it play because we can't get the audio to work, the irony, the deep irony. But there you go, you can sort of see some of that happening, and this will be up online so you can watch this afterwards as well. But it just shows you the different sort of elements of it and the different musicians where we had. And when you listen to it, it sounds awesome. You would not be able to tell that they weren't all in the same room. There was a really lovely moment that happened as well, which was Sylvia, who's the singer, and she was in the Dome. She'd been singing with Jessie, who is another singer who was up in Metropolis, all through the 3 days, really sort of, and they'd never met. One of the rules for it was they'd never met, never played together, none of the musicians. And they were singing together on songs that they hadn't rehearsed before, just making it work. And she was waiting at the end of the event, like looking behind her, and she was just like, oh yeah, I'm just waiting for Jessie. It's like, yeah, he's in London? And she'd completely just forgotten that he was like away. So we were like, yes, that's a success, that's going in our list. And then I just wanted to quickly end with the very boring slide that tells you the project timeline. So we've been working on this since, I said, way back really. It had about 8 months in development before we got the bid. We've had a set of trials. We've got some trials coming up in November as well, hopefully which we'll be able to have some members of the public and members of industry come to as well. So watch this space, because it would be great to be able to reach out to you on the contact list to see if you want to come and be part of that. And the same for the showcase event, which will be on the 3rd of March in 3 venues: Brighton Dome, O2 Blue Room, Metropolis Studios. But the main centre will be the Dome, and that will also have the fabulous alternative stage as part of it, because one of the things that we were really keen to do when I was constructing the idea of a festival, not an event, was, for me, it's all about, a festival is about that new talent that you discover. A festival is about opportunities for that new talent to be seen by new people as well. So for us, we thought that the alternatives, well, for me, I thought the alternative stage was totally key to that. So working with Platform B and Wild Sussex to really sort of make sure that that's a big focus of it, because that's what a festival is, isn't it? You go there not for the headliners, but for who you might discover on the way. That's it.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Donna. That's so great. Next, Phil Jones. So the alternative stages, I'd love you to get into a bit of this stuff, but we do need I guess we need a starting point, we need to know where we stand in terms of both the opportunities and the challenges of this new technology. Can I ask you to speak to us a little bit about that?
Yes, you can, and I'll do my best. So, as Chris was saying, I used to work in the music industry, and the time when I worked in the music industry was the CD years. Some of you may remember CDs. According to Tomorrow's World, you could put jam on them and they would still play, but actually that was a kind of lie, because they kind of destroyed themselves after a few years. But it was a period where people went out and bought CDs to renew their collections. People bought new CDs. People bought stuff they already had on vinyls on CDs. And to work in the music industry then, it really felt like there was loads of money sloshing around. It felt like a great time to be in the music industry. I don't know if anyone here was in the music industry during that time, but it was fantastic. The assumption, I think, is that with streaming, actually, there's not as much money in the music industry, or at least there's not as much money in the music industry that's going to recording artists as there was then. That's the assumption. Actually, if you look at the data, that's not true. There is actually more money going to recording artists, going to artists now than there was at the height of the CD boom in the music industry. The difference is, that's the total pie. The difference is that there are far more people in the music, far more artists in the music industry than there was then. So the pie is being divided through a lot more people. And the reason there are more people in the music industry, more artists in the music industry than there were then, is really a function of the digital technologies, the internet and the web, that enabled people to become creators who'd never been creators before. So the technology that enabled people to make YouTube videos and post them online and be seen by, potentially be seen by many, many people. Often you're seen by no one, but you could be seen by many, many people, is part of the same set of technologies that means that people can create music and put it out into the world and potentially have people listen to it. Whereas before there were gatekeepers which were the big labels. It's much easier to produce music and put music out there than there was before. So what we've got at the moment, I think, is a challenge around the way that the revenues from streaming, music streaming, are actually distributed. So they're distributed in a very unequal way. And the top 1%, it sounds like society, doesn't it? Because the top 1% of artists, the superstar artists, get round about 80% of the revenues from music streaming. So a huge proportion. And then the rest divide up what's left. So that's a challenge. It doesn't feel ethical and it doesn't feel fair. What I think is interesting is that when you get these new technologies, or you get technologies that are being developed in new ways, in the way that Donna's talked about, in terms of the opportunity not to just stream audio tracks, but to stream concerts across different venues, in real reproduced venues, in new ways. In other ways, new ways for musicians to reach audiences and new ways for musicians to build fan bases, then you get the opportunity sometimes to reinvent the rules around who benefits from that. There's a window that opens for a short period of time. It doesn't often stay open long, but there's a term, isn't there? Leonard Cohen once said, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And I think that's the position that we are at the moment. So I think there's an opportunity now to think about how the revenues from these new models might be more ethically distributed among those people who actually create the product, to use your term, in the first place. It may not be successful, but it's worth trying. So I think that's the opportunity that we've got at the moment. And that is one of the reasons, I think, why these technologies, all these technologies that we work with here at the Fusebox, are really interesting, because they open up opportunities, sometimes in a short period, but sometimes for a longer period, for people to reinvent and rethink things that previously were accepted as locked down. So that's my take on it. The final thing I'd say around this is, you ask about alternative stages. And I think Donna's right. I think the alternative stage, for me, the alternative stages part is the most exciting and interesting part of the whole festival. Yes, you might have, Warner Music might be doing kind of a virtual Beyonce on stage, or something like that. But the alternative stages bit, I think, speaks to what Brighton actually is really good at, which is the stuff that you try and sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work. The stuff that are sometimes glorious failures. And everyone's been to a festival and been to the alternative stage and seen those kind of glorious failures, bands that really give it their all, sometimes succeed, sometimes don't. And you may discover things that absolutely don't work and you'll never go and see that band again. But sometimes you discover really brilliant things which you will follow for life and really have an impact on you. And I think that's what we're trying to do with the alternative stages part, is we're trying to be brave. with the way that we program it, the things which we do, and accept that some will work and some won't work. But, you know, that's the gig.
That totally makes sense, because you can go to a small stage and you'll see 2 or 3 bands that clearly aren't going to light up the world, but you only need to see one that can change your life. And especially if you then see one that then does go up to light on, make massive changes and just give joy to millions of people, you've caught them at that point where quite often the great bands are still the most interesting when they're just starting out. I mean, some bands go on to do, but yeah, it works aesthetically as well, doesn't it? It just works as like a seeing something in its sort of early stages and knowing it's going to be something amazing is kind of more fun than... Well, I definitely preferred seeing great bands in small venues than like decades later when they're old and struggling and not very good anymore and still playing. Not that that's all bands, but... Anna, you know about this. You've been putting on post-COVID shows, and you've created blended shows as well. So you have been back into the live sphere in a fairly big way since we were allowed to. Was it, by the way, in terms of what you were saying about a gig being amazing, and you mentioned the dome shows, do you think it was extra magic seeing good gigs because we'd had the forced gap? And because we hadn't been able to see any live music?
Yeah, I think I've had I don't know if everyone else has experienced this, but I feel like I've had a reset, and I feel about the way about live music that I did when I first went to see gigs when I was like 12, 13. So, but yeah, I think it's the pause, and it just sort of feels quite tangible, doesn't it? It just feels very real. And, you know, the quality of the acts were really good at the Dome as well. And everyone was just giving it their all, because they were like, boy, have I missed this, you know, and it's been a long time. So, yeah.
I definitely agree. I went to see an act that I'm not even that bothered about and found myself tearing up 2/3 of the way through thinking, this is the most amazing thing I've ever experienced in my life. Hold on, I thought they weren't that good. And the distance did make them look wonderful again. How have your shows been going, the ones that you've done where you've also provided a kind of a live video element, a live streaming element?
So I have got one coming up, and it was part of a series of stream shows at a church venue in town called St George's, and that's yet to have like the sort of streamed element. So we've had, I mean, the Live is Alive ones, which was the Dome ones that happened where the venues programmed them, they were streamed live, and then they were in person as well. In terms of the take-up, the take-up wasn't massive, but in terms of the people wanting to be there, it was. And then, you know, I've got a final series of 7 stream shows, and the last one's a hybrid one, and I just don't want to put the artist through having to stream it live, so all sorts of things can go wrong, as we know with what happened with Glastonbury. So that's happening on the 13th of October, so we'll see what the ticket sales are going to be like. But when we were in deepest, darkest lockdown, I did a few sort of stream shows, and they always did fantastically well, because you had a captive audience at home. But now I'm not sure if they'll do as well. I mean, I got this Arts Council funding to do grassroots artists and film them at St George's and stream it, and it was over summer. So, you know, everyone was out and about, but, you know, so the take-up hasn't been massive, but at least the sort of grassroots artists have got a product now to be able to take away and sort of expose to other people and show people. And the whole series I'm hoping to reintroduce in December when people are hopefully more indoors, and see how they go.
More generally, in terms of streaming shows and then the future for that, what happens beyond streaming, and particularly including this use of immersive tech. Can you talk a little bit about how you'd see that unfolding, maybe, and what you think about it?
In the future?
Yeah.
I mean, I am quite surprised. I really did think that once we came back to gigs in person, that the shows that sold out, agents would say, you know, let's get them on streamed as well, and you can kind of limit the sort of reach to them, you know, in terms of the area, so it might not affect the next town where the artist is playing. But that hasn't quite happened. I mean, I found that agents, when I was approaching them when we were in lockdown to see whether some of the regular artists, more profile artists that I've worked with would like to do a stream, they were quite sort of against it, really. Oh, right. They weren't sort of into it. I think maybe because the finances aren't there, and yeah, they just sort of were very, very much focused on the in-person. But you know, bigger artists like Nick Cave and Laura Marling, I think that they could do special sort of streamed events and get, you know, and get the audiences in, as we've seen, or hybrid events. So I think there's definitely mileage of that. I think with the grassroots scene, you know, people just want to see them in person and feel how they're sort of live, how they are live, rather than, you know, watch a stream show. But I do think it's a really good facility for grassroots artists to therefore have something to show to people. You know, because I must admit, when I look for artists, I go to try and find something that they've done live, and the sort of quality is not always great. You know, it's something on their friend's done on an iPhone or whatever. So to have a really nicely produced live show is really good to sort of launch them. So yeah.
Like as part of their showcase materials, basically.
Yeah.
When you you teach both event management, the physical kind of side of event management, and the streaming. What are you finding that the students? Are you finding there's a big uptick in students that want to do shows a different way from what we're used to? And also, maybe what are you telling them to protect themselves, or what's the best practice for it? Or hasn't that been established yet?
Well, I think it's just the very start of it. I think we're at the start of the journey. You know, we've all kind of been through lockdown, have had to really sort of learn on our feet, and now it's like we've got a bit more time, and you know, I think this will develop, but we don't quite know how it's going to develop. So my students have watched stream shows during lockdown, but they are producing, you know, talking about producing live in-person shows. I mean, I suppose it's if the option's open to them, you know, if the venue has got the facilities, it's a good thing to do. During lockdown, they did, you know, in order to do live shows as part of their course, they did, you know, record them, and they found that was, you know, quite good because they had a lot more time to sort of think out the sort of technology. They weren't always live streamed, it was the kind of streamed and then, you know, recorded and then produced and then streamed. So I think they enjoyed that element of it, you know, the sort of quality control. But I think we're just at the very sort of start of things, really. But they are, you know, it is on their radar, and I think it's part of their future, and I think they recognise that. You know, they've been the kind of lockdown kids, haven't they? You know, so, you know, it's some of them, it might have been their first gig, you know, seeing a stream. And I think also the sort of DIY punk element of it is really great, you know, that you can, you know, record an artist and put it out on Facebook and, you know, get people watching it and take control yourself. You've just got to remember it's 720 pixels is the maximum you can use out of bitter experience. I enjoyed that side of things during lockdown. So, you know, the technology's there, and you don't need like massive kits to be able to do it. Just, you know, download OBS and process it, and, you know, get the artist to do a good recording. So yeah.
You sound to me relatively optimistic about the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I had wondered, as I looked at the complete explosion of streaming as real life gigs couldn't happen, I felt initially I felt the opposite way. I started to think this could be the end of in-person gigs, or this could accelerate a kind of decline and make it harder. So is that a potential challenge? Is the idea, especially if the technology becomes that much more engaging and immersive, that people really feel like they're at a show when they're in their living room, does this become a potential risk for the real live, I said the word real, the live music world?
I don't think so, because I think artists have to perform different on a stream. I think it's a live TV show. I mean, look at the way sort of Glastonbury, that's our only experience really, or my only experience of sort of live streaming or recorded and then streamed. Artists have to put on, they're very immediate, aren't they? Especially if it's like a singer-songwriter and they're solo and they're in a studio or whatever. So they have to sort of, there's a lot more chat and engagement, and it's not as long. I don't think people can sit watching a screen for an hour and a half as you do at a gig. It's a bit more sort of, fast-paced, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, it's a different sort of art form, I think, and there's it's a really nice coming together of people if a lot of people engage in the chat as well. I found that. So I think it's just another element of what's possible for an artist and for a promoter and the music world, really. But we do need to get the agents behind it. Other people need to be brought on board for it to happen, because they need to believe in it as well, because they're the ones who are responsible for the live performances of the artists. So yeah, I just don't think that they've caught up yet. I think it needs to maybe come from the artists or the audience or, this kind of event.
So you'd suggest that maybe the booking agent world is the bit of the cog in the system that isn't yet, not the cog, the cog that's still moving a bit slower.
Yeah. I mean, the artists who I dealt with were grassroots and didn't have agents, the ones where I did sort of streams. And, they got it. So one artist, it was really good, she's called Roxanne Sebastian. She went on a virtual tour every night, so she pretended and filmed just before she started, going out the door with the, guitar on her back and that kind of thing. And she put a really good kind of well-produced show on. So, artists I feel are involved. I think, maybe been exposed to it a lot more than the middle ground artists, where they're so used to this kind of, well, I've got my entourage with me, and all the things that go into a live show, that's different,
And there have been certain kinds of artists that have done that as well, haven't they? There is a certain kind of artist that has a kind of a slightly more theatrical, performative sense of what their self is. It's kind of the opposite kind of artist that what I was. So I was definitely like a stand there in trousers and sing songs type bloke. But that kind of sense of, let's stage this, let's whether it's outfits or setting or context or surrounding it, there is something there, isn't there, about theatricality being a real advantage at this point for artists.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we've got to remember who streams might be quite good for in the future. And I think that there's a whole section of society who maybe can't go out because they're underage, or they're just not able to get out of the house for some reason, and they still want to engage in live gigs, So I do see that streaming is maybe, could be part of their world, and could be, marketed to them and be something that could really, bring the outside world inside type thing, where they're just not able to go out because of their age or, their situation. It's a diverse thing, isn't it? It's an inclusive, democratic sort of process, because it's open to all. And I certainly loved, sat on my sofa just thinking, what am I going to do tonight? And 10 minutes later, I'm there watching some artists in the States doing their thing, or some Icelandic artists, and it's good. I must admit, when I first came to streaming, and I was just on the day of the show, I had such anxiety. I was like, what do I do? Because I'm used to going to the supermarket, getting the rider, arriving at the venue, dealing with all these people. And it was just, I had to let them, someone who knew about kind of, OBS and all that kind of producing it, hand that over to them. I suppose like you do with a sound engineer, you're a lot more involved when you're there in person. I just wonder if there's I wonder what the promoter's role is in streaming. It's kind of going to be interesting, because the artists could do it themselves, but it's just, I suppose the promoter can offer the sort of marketing reach to it. So yeah, so it was a very different experience for me, but it's one that I kind of was, I kind of got used to. It was quite nice. It's a lot less work.
Yeah, and it does raise all those things of the peripheries at gigs, like the merchandise or the riders. Suddenly, one has to find different ways around that as well. So it's... Yeah,
and there's a lot more responsibility on the artist.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Anna. Thank you very much.
Right.
I'm going to move on finally to Dean. So there were all these things happening in the music industry anyway. One can kind of see a pattern of the way things were changing, technology was getting involved, and then COVID-19 happened, and the entire industry literally ground to a halt overnight. You all remember it was, along with several other industries, it was immediate. So we were all firefighting and inventing situations to be able to keep going or whatever. But the music industry already had to kind of learn a whole new legal framework for the rise of when audio streaming happened, or you could go all the way back to when the first sound recording technology became commercially available. And prior to that, there were millions of sales in sheet music. That was the main way that people bought music, was sheet music, and then that vanished in the space of a few months as people started listening to the early kind of records, or whatever was before records. So the cultural industries always have that kind of a handbrake turn, don't they? I want to move on to Dean to talk about to get you to talk about the legal side of things and what you've been able to do with artists and with other people in the cultural industries, responding to that swerve, the fact that. So, what was it like for lockdown in you? Would you like to come up, or would you rather? Do you want to come up? Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Dean.
He is the headliner.
Yeah, headliner.
I don't do encores, by the way, but there are merch packages and meet and greets available. Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. So, yeah, rather than giving a kind of turgid kind of lecture on the law regarding live streaming, I thought I'd try and make it more kind of anecdotal about my experiences during lockdown, dealing with a variety of different clients who faced challenges and opportunities through this. I mean, it's not a newfangled thing. Live streaming has been around since the 90s, but it became a necessity, I think, for a lot of artists who wanted to keep an engagement with their fan base, and also for fans who just missed going to shows. So this industry emerged, and there wasn't really an infrastructure in place, particularly from a licensing perspective, to deal with the issues that were faced. I mean, I represented DJs, bands, promoters, venues, live streaming platforms that have emerged, superstar DJs who are kind of doing gigs in the metaverse, and myself, I actually did a DJ gig myself, believe it or not, at the prestigious Better Half pub, and had 369 views, believe it or not. Yes, of me doing some dad dancing and playing some vinyl records. So I've had it from all perspectives, but it's from a kind of DIY artist perspective. A lot of artists put on their own shows that they produce themselves. They used a variety of different platforms. The most notable and potentially surprising success story out of all of my clients from lockdown is Gok Wan, the TV fashion blogger. He started lockdown. He was a kind of celebrity DJ, but he's an old raver, and he lives on his own in East London. He started this thing called Isolation Nation on a Friday night and did a kind of kitchen disco, playing records, and it became a phenomenon. And he would have 10,000 plus people tuning in on Facebook every Friday. Mostly the demographic was potentially 80% women of a certain age, kind of ex-clubbers, and they would remain logged on for 3 or 4 hours for the whole show. And some weekends he had more people than watching Carl Cox or Beatport streams. And on the back of that, he has now launched his career as a DJ, and he's selling ridiculous amounts of tickets hard tickets for a forthcoming tour, and it's anticipated that in the next maybe year or two he could be at the O2. So he's developed a business on the back of live streaming. It wasn't monetized, but it's allowed him to create, an ongoing business. I've had other artists who've had engagement with their fan bases and have put on rather ambitious mini kind of virtual festivals where they've had DJs playing along with a live performance. But as probably some of you may have experienced during lockdown, the platforms, particularly YouTube, have algorithms and tracing software so that it can identify if there's any copyrighted material, particularly if it's a cover version or a recorded track that you're playing. And I've had artists who put on this live streamed event, and within 5 minutes it's taken down by the platform, much to their embarrassment, and then you've got to try and produce the necessary license to get it re-put up. So yeah, it's fraught with difficulties, and the licensing situation has improved. I mean, back then, the way that it works is that it was analogous to kind of a live show. So if you are attending a gig at Concord 2 or something, then the way that it works is that the venue need to have a PRS license to cover the royalty that's paid for the public performance of the songs that are going to be performed by the band. And it's normally 4.2%, 4.2%, isn't it, of the takings goes to the songwriters, basically. And then what happened during lockdown, PRS, in their kind of infinite wisdom, decided unilaterally, without consulting the industry at all, to put the prices up to between 8 and 17% of the takings, which they were met with scorn by the industry. They essentially made the whole model unviable, and they were taking money out of the pockets of the impoverished musicians who were struggling most, who weren't getting any kind of funding or help from anywhere else. So it was an appalling act, and they, within a very short space of time, backtracked and changed their model. And there is now, in fact, a new license. It's called the online concert license, which is much more affordable and much more effective, essentially. So I won't go into too much detail on the mechanics of it, but if you are putting on a show yourself, what license you need is really dependent upon two factors. One, whether it's going to be monetized or free, and two, which platform you're going to use. The main platforms are Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, obviously, Zoom, Twitch, and Vimeo are the main 6 platforms. TikTok, obviously, is another one. But because Facebook and Instagram and YouTube already have their own licensing arrangements in place, if you're going to do a show and it's free, it's non-monetized, then if you do it on Facebook or you do it on Insta or you do it on YouTube, you don't need a license. It's all covered by their license. If you're going to do it on one of those other 3 platforms and it's going to be free, you still need to get a license. You need to get what's called a online limited online music license, which will cost you 84 quid a year. If you are going to monetize it, then this new online concert license is available. It is available on a gig-by-gig basis. It's a bit of a pain in the arse, basically. You'd need to get a license, submit a set list, and pay between 25 quid and 75 quid if it's not going to make more than £1,500. And yeah, that gives you the ability to put on your show. If it emanates from the UK, then the license covers you for most of the rest of the world. There are certain territories that aren't covered, so there is still a risk that you could put it up. And if you are selling tickets in a territory like America, say, that may not be covered, that it could still be taken down. So it's not foolproof. And even if you are playing your own songs, I mean, that's the thing. If you are a PRS member, so we've got a question there.
Yeah, is that tax, or is that when you say it's a license, does that cover you with some kind of insurance?
No, it's a license that's issued by PRS to pay the songwriters of the songs that you are singing. And it could be that you're singing your own songs, so you actually have to pay PRS to effectively pay you back your money, weirdly. There is a discretionary license. If you are only playing your own songs, you still need to get a license, but it will be free. But there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape that you need to go through. And it's about royalties, yeah. So it's giving the songwriters a cut of the income that's being generated, yes.
I just wondered, so if you don't have a license and you stream a gig, like, they know, like, what, how's that
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, they are quite vociferous in their enforcement, PRS. I've seen them, suing their members for non-payment of royalties for gigs by that member. But I don't know. It's a lot of it is relying on trust. As I mentioned before, there are content ID systems in place that can identify and take down stuff if there are kind of false positives. But it's reliant largely on trust, I guess. And therefore, it's not really economically viable for grassroots artists, to get licenses. It's costing them money. It's very unclear, whether it's going to be possible to sell that many tickets for a streamed gig when you can go and see the actual gig probably now. And also, it depends on what kind of show it is. I mean, I think the shows that seem to get the most attraction are, unique shows, an artist doing, something that you would never see them do before. There was an amazing one, Erykah Badu did this incredible show in her house with 3 different rooms. One had like kind of conventional instruments, one had all mad synths and stuff, and another one had like kind of Baroque instruments, and fans could vote which songs which she performed in different rooms. It was quite an amazing thing. That's the kind of thing that works. But just a normal gig, I think the reality is that most artists will put it on to to continue some engagement with the fan base. But what Anna was saying, I think that there certainly will be a continuing market, I think, for streamed shows, because not everyone will be able to attend. Not everyone lives in a metropolis near to a concert place. So, disabled people that have anxiety, who can't get to shows, people who can't afford to go to shows. So I think there will be a kind of secondary market, I hope. But yeah, so that's the situation for DIY artists. Another thing that happened also is there's a distinction from a kind of legal perspective about live streaming and films, essentially, because if you're talking about a show that's streamed live or shortly after, I mean, under this PRS license, you're allowed to stream the show for 72 hours to cover different time zones. But if you leave it up after that, then it becomes not a webcast, it becomes a film. And if you, and this is where a lot of problems emanated before, is that people were putting films up using a PRS performance license. And if it's a film, then you need to get a what's called a synchronization license. So you need to, if the artist has a publishing company, you need to go to the publishing company and say, oh, how much will it cost to put those songs on my film? And I've got a client at the moment who's streaming quite a lot of jazz shows, and a lot of the artists are playing kind of jazz standards, and a lot of the publishers want like 300 or 400 quid per song to put it up on the so it makes it kind of not viable, really. So that's a situation for DIY artists. It's still there. I mean, I think the scene was emerging, but thank God, we're back having live shows now. So a lot of the emphasis on streaming has kind of moved on now, because it's not really necessary as a kind, unless it's a special kind of Erykah Badu type show. But I think that what's happening now is that on the back of the problems, licensing problems, and also just the kind of production values, a lot of those streamed shows were very DIY, done on a rickety old camera, in someone's kitchen or whatever, and it didn't look that great. So a lot of companies are now emerging to help artists create a great show. And I worked with a local promoter who was a kind of live promoter, doing a lot of shows at Concord 2 and other venues. And there were a lot of artists who weren't members of PRS. So PRS wasn't really a problem, but they didn't really know how to shoot a gig properly. So he brought his team in, used the venues which were shut anyway, shot a very professionally filmed concerts, 5 or 6 different cameras, top quality sound, and then the deal was, okay, we'll provide the venue, we'll provide the film crew, you turn up, do the show, and then you promote it, do a few tweets and posts on Insta about it, and the copyright in the film owned by the promoter, he gets an opportunity to monetize it on the YouTube channel, which has pre-roll. It's a free show, but you watch it on YouTube. There's pre-roll advertising. And then he gets an exclusive window for a couple of months. And then after that, the band then get the concert footage. And as Anna was saying, it becomes something that they can then use to their benefit to showcase their skills as performing artists. So it doesn't cost any money. It's a nice model, and it was kind of working quite well. Other artists, I've got this other artist, big pop artist, who did a show at the Royal Albert Hall, and there's quite a few new platforms emerging who want to get into bed with kind of emerging and quite well-known artists. So they paid, a considerable sum of money, 6 figures, to cover all of the costs of hiring of the venue, the big show, the production, etc. They own the copyright in the film, but the film was put out as a £10. It was a webcast. I don't think it's available as a film, but it went out, and the deal is with these kind of platforms, it's a profit split. So after the costs have been recouped, the artist gets, it varies, but in this case, It was slightly less than 50% the artist got after recoupment, but the larger the takings, the higher the artist share. It kind of increased incrementally based upon how many tickets were sold. So that kind of works quite well. And if you are an artist, I mean, at a certain level, there are these platforms. That the company that I was talking about them were called On Air, but there's a few others. Live Now are probably the most well-known platform. They did the Dua Lipa show, which had 5 million views, sold 270,000 tickets. I think on the back of that, her increase in her physical tickets went up 70% overnight. Massive success. BTS, the K-pop band, they sold 750,000 tickets or something crazy like that. But there are other ones. There's Live Now. There's a really good one called Mandolin, who, I don't know if you know them. They're based in Nashville. Done some deals with them. They work with, they did a great show for Richard Thompson. He did 3 different shows, one featuring his new album, one featuring kind of Fairport Convention material, and one that was voted, the audience had the choice to choose the track list. And that did extremely well. And if you team up with these platforms, they can help you put together a great show, but they also have amazing tools that allow you to market the product and sell tickets, basically. And also with these live shows, the thing is what you are getting is data, because everyone's going to be registered. They're all a potential fan. If they buy a ticket for an online show, then they're potentially going to be buying physical tickets as well. And yeah, so that's that. So there's the DIY thing, there's the promoter thing, there's the platforms that I've just mentioned. But I think the most fascinating aspect of this, you know, the future of online gigs is really to do with the metaverse. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the metaverse, but it's, you know, we are on the cusp of enormous change. We're going from Web 2.0 to Web 3.0 is just happening, where it's, you know, people, places and things are going to be intersecting. It's the future of the internet. And, you know, it's a parallel digital universe with augmented reality and virtual reality where, you know, it's all going to happen in the metaverse, in games. It's the gamification of gigs. And, you know, in recent, you know, Roblox, I don't know if anyone goes on to Roblox. It's like mostly aimed at 10-year-old kids, but, you know, it's 50 million people a day, kids are on there, getting their parents, no doubt, to give them money to acquire Robux, which is the currency on there. And yeah, I mean,
They've just done a partnership with Warner, actually, haven't they?
it's crazy, yeah. Lil Nas X did a show on there and made 8 figures in virtual merch. So not even merch that you actually made. So, you know, more than $10 million in virtual merch because the kids want to be wearing it. Ariana Grande did a show on Fortnite where and my daughter told me you could buy the avatar of Ariana Grande and you could be her and watch her concerts whilst skiing down a mountain, you know, wearing, you know, her, being her while seeing the gig. And, you know, it's just, you know, it's the future of what's going to happen because it's a limitless environment. And what's happened in Web 2.0 is that everything is rather antisocial, because if you go onto Spotify, you've got a list of tracks, you've got a picture, you've got, you know, a bio, and that's it really. You can't really interact. But on there, it's a place where people can have shared experiences watching a gig, and also brands love it because it allows them to be a part of, you know, a shared experience, an emotional experience, and brands that are part of emotional experiences statistically, you know, are much more likely to sell to customers. So yeah, it's fascinating. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, a lot of the events that are on these games are ephemeral. They're just up there and then they go. But I heard a podcast with the guy from Roblox, their music guy, and what is being planned in that game and other games are kind of permanent fixtures. Worlds will be created within games where artists, not just, you know, Ariana Grande, but the long tail, any kind of artist will be able to go into these new metaverses and engage with their fan bases, deal directly with brands, and also, you know, maybe circumvent the gatekeepers. You know, it's going to be a new, much more egalitarian world, I think. And yeah, it's kind of fascinating how that's all going to play out. But I think it's going to be quite interesting. But yeah, so in terms of, to summarise, I think that, yeah, it's a fascinating time. I think that it's going to continue, streaming of shows. I think the licensing has improved a bit. I think it will become a kind of add-on for it's a bit like, you know, if watching football, if you could have a season ticket at you know, Old Trafford, or you could go down the pub and watch the football with your mates, or you could sit at home and watch it on the telly, and that's what's going to be happening, I think, there. So I think that's going to remain in place. I think the metaverse is fascinating, and I think there'll be a lot of engagement with artists, with the companies, these platforms that are emerging now, who will almost act as like record companies, really, in a way, in the kind of streaming environment. They'll provide the nuts and bolts and the marketing expertise, and they'll fund it all. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, don't forget your wine. Do you want to take the drink? Can you pass the drink? Thanks so much, Dean. That's amazing. Even back in 2018, before everything happened, Fortnite was the fourth biggest fashion design label in the world in terms of profit because of all the outfits they sold in Fortnite. I was watching that first ever the Marshmallow gig, which was the first one they ever did, and it was just 12 minutes, but there were 10 million people watching it, and then 15 million. Does that include the people that watched it later? Yeah, it was an amazing thing because it was just 12 minutes. But almost the best bit was that he did a song about flying, and at that moment they switched off the gravity, so your avatar could just fly, which was it was perfect bit of like production you couldn't do in a real gig, not yet anyway. That's fantastic. So does anybody have any questions or comments for anyone on the panel or the whole panel? Are we at a point where we can dive into that? Do we need to pass a microphone around before we've got a microphone. Please wait till the microphone comes to you before you ask your question so that the people out in the internet land can hear it as well.
Yep, Darryl Butlin, Hexology. I'm really fascinated with all the work that's been done in the 5G festival coming up. How with all the background work that's been done, how fixed is the program? How, you know, is there room for sort of expansion and to bring in sort of other artists, other events, and people doing things at this late stage?
I guess this is probably a question for Donna.
It's pretty. I mean, it's a strange beast because obviously it's like anything. You come up with a concept, you apply for the money, you get the money, and you create a budget as part of that. applying for the money. So it's fixed to a certain degree, and then there's sort of flexibility within it. But it's also what the idea is it's also like a point on a journey. So no, not within this because it's sort of allocated, but yes, in terms of I think what might be the more exciting stuff, which is what happens next, you know, that comes out of it. So that's the honest answer, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's right. We've got a whole series of activities that we've kind of got to deliver by the time the festival happens in March, but we're already starting to think, what do we do beyond March? Do you know what I mean? What's the next stage of this? Because the stuff that you were talking about at the very end, I think is the most exciting stuff. And it's the things that we're trying to try out in the 5G festival. So at the moment, a streamed gig is a sort of 2D affair, isn't it? It's watching a screen by and large. But what we're testing at the moment is you can actually move through a music venue. So you can have different perspectives on the gig, or you can leap from one music venue and one gig to another, try out different stuff. So it's or you can converse with other people at the gig and discuss the gig with them as avatars in that gig. So it's trying to be a much more reflective, immersive, and as you say, a kind of a part of the metaverse.
Can I just give a shout out to that? Because I think that's true as well. And actually, the funny thing about 5G festivals, often the way of technology, isn't it? The 5G festival, as conceived almost 2 years ago, already feels like it's sort of already a little bit like it's going to feel old-fashioned by the time it gets out there. Do you know what I mean? Because it's sort of fixed in terms of what it's trying to do. So the more exciting stuff is happening, not just in the alternative stage, but also in other conversations that are going on. MAFJ and Bunty are working on, and the Incubits Collective, for example, are working on just such an awesome music-based in metaverse project that I feel really excited about. And so I'm already trying to find ways within like my capacity to try and support that, because I think that's brilliant, you know. So it's an ongoing, you know, it's an ongoing process. So, yeah.
Do you have any others?
Can I ask about the latency?
Of course. Can we wait till you get the microphone and then ask?
There's a latency.
We're waiting on the latency of the people online.
Okay.
That was yeah.
So, as a musician, it's difficult to kind of put across to people who don't realise how important latency is. You can't possibly play music with someone else unless they're in front of you. And so, I mean, what is the latency for these trials you did at the Dome with people in London
You're
Metro?
asking me a question that I can't. I don't know exactly. Yeah. There is some exact numbers. I can't.
Less than 10 on Dome.
Yeah, less than 10. That's what it is then. It was whatever it says on there. So.
All right. I mean, that gives you an idea because I mean, computers were until quite recently much slower than that. So if you're trying to mix tracks together, you know, you're looking at lots of problems trying to just mix.
Everyone was really surprised.
Yeah.
Can I just say that as well? So all the audio partners as well could not quite believe that they managed to get the latency down to that level. There's more challenges around the video.
There's
obviously.
There's a thing where you can do like a gig, virtual gig with other people, where one person is basically playing the track, and the other people just add in their parts to it. But the actual kind of whole integrity of the track is laid down, for example, by the bass player. And it's not really quite real music. You can't make real music like that. You have to have just no latency at all to make real music, almost.
But definitely...
There's kind of levels of compromise that you have to make, essentially, as a band, to make real music.
Definitely the technological difference between 5G and 4G is, to an enormous extent, solving that problem, because also... that's kind of the point of 5G. It's that much faster. Obviously, there's still going to be issues with things going on at either end, but if the latency caused by purely the travel in between the spaces down the internet is dealt with to a massive degree, so it's taken from being several seconds to being a tiny fraction of a second. Yeah, of course, you're still going to have issues with click tracks and very precise stuff, but maybe that's where that starts to feel musical again. And definitely it's people's experiences. We've got examples of people's experiences where they have found themselves lost in music that is being genuinely created live in several spaces. I had a really difficult issue with this last summer, where a project that I was doing that was in the real world got turned into an online project, and I have experienced that nightmare of trying to explain to stakeholders why a live performance in 3 remote places can't work, and have the stakeholders have basically full-on tantrums because they can't understand that's a factor, and that as fast as the mainstream internet is at the moment, you can't play music down it. So I do appreciate, it's something that the general audience perhaps is finding even more confusing now than they would have done in 2019, because they've been fooled by so many professional-looking stuff that goes on online. So many. Oh, look at this! I've seen this footage of an orchestra where they're all playing together in different rooms. It was pre-recorded. They constructed it, and so now we have almost a load of perhaps one of the big jobs that a project like this is going to do is not completely separately from all the magic stuff it's doing for performers and promoters, is we're going to spend time educating the audience again so that they understand that what's happening is what it is and not something else.
Well, why it's conceived of as well, because actually you can't fool a live audience in the same way that you can't a live artist play with someone else. That's where the challenge and the interesting parts of this come from. The other thing just to say as well is that the 5G relies on some hard infrastructure as well. So it's the cables that connect where the 5G stuff is working as well. So there's some hardwired aspects to it as well, and it's a combination of those that make it that make it work in terms of reducing the sort of latency.
Anyone else? Yeah, we've only got time for maybe 2 more. So, anyone else? Anyone who's not a guy? Not to be mean to the guys, all your questions are valid. No, I'm gonna carry on asking guys questions then, if that's all right.
Thanks. So just a quick comment on apologies for being a guy, by the way. A quick comment on latency, but then a proper question for the panel. So I'm actually a wireless technologist, and we ran a sort of forerunner of the 5G festival thing, which was the world's first 5G music lesson. And we had Jamie Cullum in London and some amateur musicians in Birmingham and in Bristol. We did actually make it work, but it was skin of the teeth stuff. But just to calibrate when people are talking about the numbers, a millisecond is about 30 centimetres. So if you get it to 8 milliseconds, it's like somebody's only sitting 2.5 meters away. That's really good, that's really, really good when you can get it like that. The challenge is democratizing it. So the question for the panel was that a lot of what was being discussed about the different models for streaming and hybrid and festivals and so on are clearly very different depending on the sort of performer. And, what's going to work for a really well-known performer selling tens of millions in merchandise isn't going to work for the grassroots folks you were talking about, or even for amateur folks. And my interest is actually as a trustee of the charity Music for All, where we're trying to actually get regular people, amateurs, making music because of all the great benefits from that, for your brain and for many other things. And going from that very put-on event, the festival, to something that actually works scalably for people more generally is really challenging and could still be many years away. So I just wondered what your thoughts were about how to actually, you talked about the long tail before, and even extending the long tail to private individuals who just want to make music and have some fun there. What can we do to go from the showcase events through to something that's really part and parcel of the fabric that we use?
Anyone want to take that on?
Can I just say the 5G Festival is the platform and the technology that does all those things. So it's not just an event that's happening as a showcase. So the idea is that it's developing a set of tools and technologies that will have a life that will become utilised in the way that people make music together and share music together. So that's its ambition at its core. It's not trying to put on an event that does something. It's about trying to create exactly what you were describing as a tool, a technology that can be used for artists to collaborate together remotely, just wherever they are, or to communicate with audiences by providing something that's live, tangible, dynamic, remote, and that you feel immersed within, which comes into that sort of metaverse stuff that Dean's talking about, or is something that can operate with a live venue audience and make those sort of the distances that exist in physical terms disappear through digital technology as a tool that gets used in the future available for venues, festivals, artists and whoever. So that's the aim of it.
Brilliant.
Well, if you can help us scale up what we were doing to offer free music lessons to 10,000 people.
Yeah, well, the Brighton Dome is a partner with the music service as well, so music lessons is part of the thing that they're exploring as part of it.
Could we hear from Colin?
Just to hear from everybody, it prompted a thought that every technology that's ever existed in the music industry continues to exist. I mean, everyone thought cassettes were dead. If you're a young band who's just playing your first gigs, you can't afford to manufacture vinyl, do some cassettes. And it would also seem like, oh, so it's switched off. Okay. Okay, I have to say it again. They're just making the point that it seems like every technology that's ever existed in the music industry continues. And I use the example of cassettes. And in the live mode, it seems like there's been a range of things presented, ranging in between people live streaming in their pajamas from their kitchens up to, people doing stuff in the metaverse inside games for kids of 10 years old. It's like, I feel like everything will continue and everything will develop, and finding the hybrids and the spaces in between. And that's where the interesting thing will be. I can't imagine personally I'm going to be performing in Fortnite any minute now. But I could kind of imagine something like, and nobody really brought up green issues. I mean, one of the biggest problems for touring musicians is that if we're going to go abroad, we have to fly. And, everything we do is using resources that we shouldn't be using. So can you do a tour of America? A band that all lives in different countries get together and do a tour of America that could be an interesting thing, but not like seeing people watching it on their phones, because that's not it's not immersive enough. And not the kind of metaverse, because that seems like over corporate already to me. It's like, once you start talking about those kind of big partners, the mention of Warner Brothers makes me feel like a quake in my boots. I mean, these people are making obscene amounts of money out of streaming. Actually, that's the reality. The artists aren't benefiting because most of them are on shit deals. So anyway, that's my. Sorry, it wasn't a question. It was more like a response.
I mean, in some ways, that. Oh yeah, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I haven't had loads of experience of working with VR, but like in this project that I've been working on with MathJ, like the thing is, like things like an Oculus Quest is like 300 quid, which is basically less than a phone, isn't it? Like less than and people are working to like develop that stuff, Colin. So I feel like it's actually like it sort of is like the metaverse stuff is like. It could be like as quirky and weird and like kind of like grassrootsy and left field. Like it can still be. I don't think it will be lost in there. I reckon. Yeah, no, I think so. I think it's totally possible. Yeah. Because those what are they called? They're not called headphones. The thingy viewy headsets. Yeah, like I say, they're £300 and using one of those, and if like I think what I keep hearing is like outside of the UK, like for instance, like places like where did Simon go? My friend Simon, who does that sort of thing, like went to like Ukraine, and there were like literally there. It's completely different. There were like 15-year-old girls doing like crazy programming, like it's sort of almost like other places outside of like UK and kind of the mainstream places that you sort of hear about that are sort of like leading. I don't know, you know what I mean? Like UK, everyone sort of talks about the UK, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on in other places, kind of a bit more like off-piste that you wouldn't hear about, where these sort of technologies are available and people are really like using them, like not in a real meaningful way. Yeah, it's like accessible, basically, is what I'm saying. Like they have access to this stuff and they're like nailing it. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Can we get one more comment from Sharkle down the front, and then we'll wrap it up, if that's okay. If everyone's we've just gone 5:30. If anyone's in doubt of where the time is.
Hello, my name's Eric Drass, known as Shardcore Artist. My question is really about authenticity. So, for me, the great thing about going to a gig is it's happening right now to me, and I can smell it, right? And however much this simulacra of authenticity can be transmitted via live stream or through a VR headset, it's never going to be quite the same. It's like the last mile is never going to be there. So I think the future of this stuff is much more in the metaverse and much more in the crazy punk rock shit that people are going to do virtually than it is trying to replicate the live experience. And it feels to me as if there's a kind of generational difference here about the acceptance for it. So my question for all four of you is, what do you think about the new ABBA show? Right? So ABBA, for those who aren't aware, ABBA have built their own theatre where they're having a live orchestra playing ABBA songs, but the actual performance on stage is virtual. Yeah, avatars. So in terms of this interesting place we are between authenticity, like for me that feels like an inauthentic gig, but for the gig goer it's an experience, right? They're going out, they're leaving the house, they're amongst other people, they can smell each other, but the actual experience is different. So in terms of streaming, like, is that the other direction? Is it like a live simulacra of an experience, or is it you have to do it in your headset?
It's a hologram thing, isn't it? It's almost like a hologram thing. It's something, you know, that they are of a certain age now. It shows them at their prime. That's a show that can be experienced live. You know, you're seeing holograms of them, but you could have that show operating every city in the world, and they'll never get old. Is that still a proper gig? I don't know. I've never seen a hologram show, but maybe. I mean, I suppose it's going to have. If you were sitting, you know, quite a way back, you probably couldn't really tell whether it's them or.
But I think we get. I mean, it's a bit like when Anna was talking as well, and you were talking about all the lessons that you're learning, the things that the artists are learning as they go through, and I think that was. Like, one of my barriers to the live streaming thing at the beginning of COVID was the fact that the filmmaking was so atrociously awful. And it's just like, why can't people realise that this is a film, and therefore they need to work with people who understand how to construct films? And that's what it's taken a long time, I think, for people to do it. And I think the ABBA thing is like a museum. I mean, you know, when you go to fantastic museums, they have these incredible installations now, digital like installations, and it's, let's not pretend it's a gig. It's a cultural installation, immersive cultural installation, and there's nothing wrong with that, though. I mean, I can't imagine anything worse than being immersed in ABBA personally. But do you know what I mean? For people who love them, I'm sure that's going to be great, because it's like the Bowie music, Bowie exhibition, isn't it? You know, it's that same. You know, there is a need to. It's trying to capture something in aspic. You know, which we've talked about this before as well. Like the digital is by its nature an archiving medium, so it's part of that. I think it's part of sort of holding something. But let's not pretend it's like a gig. I thought it was really interesting that we all loved our little gigs and sweaty venues, really, you know, and that's where my heart will be always.
And I don't think it has to be the same. You know, it's a different experience, isn't it? And is it less authentic? I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting term, authentic, isn't it? You know, it's different. And I guess what tends to happen is that when there's a new technology, the first thing that you tend to do is do the stuff that you do anyway, only better. But then after a while, you work out that the technology can enable you to do new, different things And that, I think, is what is going to happen with the gigs. And you just gave one small example with the fortnight and the gravity, but you could start to think about, as a performer, but also as a venue, how, if we created a venue like Concord 2 or something like that in a virtual world, what could that venue then become by adding some imagination to it? And how could that be a brand that travels around the world as a venue? So I think you start by replicating what you're used to doing, but then you move on from there when the imagination and the creativity takes hold.
I just wonder if, let's think about the generations that are growing up now. There's a lot of home entertainment. I can't say there was when I was growing up. I just couldn't wait to get the hell out of the house and go to a live gig. But now, there's people who live in places where they don't have much sort of access to gigs, maybe not venues in their town, and maybe through, they started off by playing games and having their friends virtually involved, that, there might be an introduction of and a development of them, being into that kind of virtual gig world a bit more. And that might lead them on to actually want to go to a gig, So I just wonder if it might be, something...
Almost like a gateway drug to real gigs. Wow. This has been amazing. We're out of time for the formal session. That made me think of at Reading Festival in 1992 when Nirvana headlined the Sunday night, and they put together this lineup of all the absolute best grunge bands of the time. That's a legendary show, but in the middle of that lineup, at the express request of Kurt Cobain, was Bjorn Again, the ABBA tribute band. And then at some point during their set, they did a bit where Bjorn Again played Smells Like Teen Spirit, note perfect, and the two women ran off stage as if they were frightened. And it was like thinking about that now, that has a whole loads of layers of meta sort of things about authenticity that I wasn't quite aware of at the time when I was off my nuts dancing around. If only it had been streamed. Yeah. Is there a video of that show? I mean, it's one of the great shows, isn't it? Or at least Nirvana's set is one of the great shows. So thank you so much for coming. It opens up so many doors for conversation. I'm now really excited I was already excited for the 3 coming events, but we'll be back here on the 27th of October. The title is Beyond the Stage, and that particular conversation is going to be to share examples of going beyond the stage, some case studies and some stuff where people have created these more really interesting, fascinating kind of blurring the boundaries type events. Then on the 10th of November, we're going to talk about the imaginary venue, and we're going to dive into this whole thing of mapping and creating virtual venues and whether replicating the 2 different ways of doing it, the replicating a real venue so you can then put virtual shows in it, or the kind of more crazy, quirky thing of let's create some space from scratch to put music on. So we're going to talk about those. And finally, on the 1st of December, we're going to drill down into festivals specifically and multi-venue gig series, those kinds of event. That will be called the Future Festival. That's on the 1st of December. So don't run off. If you want to hang out, there's some time to hang out. And if you're interested, if you haven't experienced a bit of live music in virtual reality, definitely approach Chris Chowan after the show, after we finish, because we have set up, there's these prototype demos of the online virtual gig platform, and it's obviously we're at a very early stage and they're developing and it's a thing, but it's really fascinating if you haven't tried it. So definitely go and try it. That stuff's been put together. I'm going to give props again to Donna she's done work on this. And over there we have Daniel Nathan and we have Nats as well from Platform B, the youth radio station. They've been involved in this. And Phil here at Wired Sussex and Chris, who's been holding the tech here, holding the tech down here, also has been very involved in that project as well. So that's really good. Let's hear it for Chris, because he's... So I have been Chris Thorpe-Tracy. You can find me online, not talking about any of this, but just generally gibbering about anything, at bordercrossing.substack.com. It's my sort of writing platform so that I don't have to write in the real world. I can write entirely in the virtual space. or I'm on Instagram at CJ Thorpe Tracy, and I'm on Twitter at ChrisTT. And before we finish, could you all please answer one final question, which is, each of you, where can people find you if they need to come and find you?
Oh, what's the best thing for me? Probably via Twitter, actually, because it's easier to say, at Donna_Close.
You can find me on Twitter at Phil Jones Wired, but actually you can find me here. So come in here and talk to me. It's authentic.
Smell you, Phil.
I think you should all come to one of my gigs and talk to me in person.
Excellent.
But I have got all, Multivinyl social media at Multivinyl.
And via my website, which is creativelaw.eu.
Brilliant. Thanks so much to all four of you. Thank you very much, Wired Sussex and the lovely Fusebox. Thank you, Anna, out there wherever you are. Thank you, Chris and Reefa, everyone for sorting this out. And have a nice virtual time. Thank you.